This is Introduction to Winter Tree ID. All clear, I see that. That is fantastic. And this is probably my favorite class to teach of all time. So first off, thank you all for being here so much. I am very excited, and I'm so happy to see all of you that are excited and motivated and ready to learn about identifying trees in the wintertime, to grow, to connect with trees in all kinds of different ways. I think it's fantastic. In fact, if you could let me know in the chat why you are here today, what brought you here, why are you interested in learning how to identify and recognize trees in the wintertime, please let me know, because then we can try to tailor the presentation. We have all kinds of things to show you to make sure that we are addressing your curiosities and your interest. I'm looking at the chat right now, so some people are doing dendrology classes and they're interested in identifying plants and trees in general. We have land managers in here, people hunting for mushrooms that want to know what kinds of trees might be associated with them. Only recognize conifers in winter. Well, that's perfect, because this actually focuses solely on broadleaf trees and identifying them in the winter time. Great for dormant pruning of fruit trees. That's a great one. General interest in botany. I am right there with you. I want to learn everything, all kinds of different subjects relating to botany. Impatient and don't want to wait for spring to identify sassafras. Oh, that's great. That's perfect, actually. That is a good segue. Like I said, I have a lot of resources prepared for you all today. Here is one of them. It's a set of new guide sheets that I am releasing today. And what do you have it? It's sassafras right there. So keep on commenting with things that you are interested in learning, and please let me know where you are joining us from today. Remember, there will be a recording from this. If you're joining and it's like 1 in the morning, don't worry, we have a recording for you. But let me show you some of the things that we have to learn with today. So what you're looking at right now is the slide presentation that we're going to be going through. And then we also have the bud cam, which is over here. Here are my hands. So here are some buds that we're going to be looking at. And we have a loop right here that we can use to try to look at these in some more detail. So as we are going through the presentation, we can switch to the bud cam and look at actual 3D real-life buds, because I always feel like that is more helpful than looking at a picture. There's just something different about being able to interact with the object compared to when it is just in 2D. Speaking of which, in some of the emails we mentioned that it would be helpful for you to bring your own bud with you. So again, in the chat, if you did bring a bud, then let me know, because we can maybe refer back to what you are holding and ask you some questions about the bud that you have in relation to the details that we'll be learning. Okay, we are at 4 minutes after the half-hour mark, so I think we have a lot of people that have joined at this point, and I think that we're good to go ahead and get started. So let's do that. Let's see. And I see a lot of people did bring a bud with them. So that is amazing. All right. Here we go. Okay. The first thing that I want to talk about is why winter tree identification seems difficult, right? So here is my theory for why it seems that way. It was that way for me when I first started off and I wanted to learn how to recognize trees in the wintertime, because I just didn't have anything else to do in the winter. I thought it was going to be a very daunting task, and here's why. So we are starting off, right, and we see this tree, and we see the tree with the green leaves on it. And when the leaves are present, that is usually what we are drawn to in terms of identifying the tree. Leaves are relatively distinctive between different species, so when they're available to us, that's what we're looking at. And then, when the leaves go away, well, what are we left looking at? We're looking at the silhouette of the tree and the bark of the tree. So I think that our first instinct is to try to identify trees in the wintertime by the bark. And that's a mistake. Bark distracts us, right? And there is a lot of difficulty to distinguishing trees by their bark. The biggest one is that when we are trying to identify a tree by its bark, we are dealing with time, right? Because that bark is not going to be the same over the course of the tree's life. So these three photos right here that I'm showing you are all of different stages of one species' life, right? This is all the same tree species. In fact, it is shagbark hickory. We can kind of see that on the right side of the photo that's right above me. We can see that it's developing the characteristic shaggy bark texture. But then if we look at the one on the far left, well, that one is relatively smooth overall, so it isn't really fitting into the name that we give it. And that is going to be the same for pretty much all different trees that you are going to encounter. It's going to be different throughout the life of the tree. So that's one aspect. In addition, the way that different trees vary from one species to another of relatively similar barks, there aren't many ways that we can distinguish them. They aren't as distinctive and absolute if we're just looking at the bark. So that is going to give us some difficulty. I do now have a class on identifying trees by their bark that I'm going to tell you about a little bit later on in the presentation, but we are not going to be looking at bark. There is a secret trick that we as naturalists and foragers get to use to identify the trees. And really, it's hidden in plain sight. We just need to know to look for them. And that is the buds. So take a look at this picture right here, right? Look at all of these different buds that come from different species of trees, okay? If I were to give you any one of these buds, or any two of these buds, and you didn't know anything else about them, I think that you could relatively easily distinguish the two of them. You might not know exactly which species they are, but if I handed you another one from one of them, you could very quickly and easily match them together, right? All of these are incredibly distinctive. Buds are always there for us in the wintertime to help us distinguish what species that we're looking for. So this class focuses on buds and the tools and details and characteristics that we need to know to be able to use them to identify trees. That is what the focus of this class, Introduction to Winter Tree ID, is. So, winter is coming. Are you ready? Right? And this is the perfect timing. We're just going into winter. It's not officially winter yet, but in most parts of North America, I would say that a lot of the leaves have fallen down. So this is the perfect time to be learning about identifying trees in the winter. And what I like to say is that buds are your buddies, and we are going to learn about them today, and we're going to become much closer with buds. So before we start to get into that, I'm going to look at the chat really quick and see if there are any questions that have come up while we have kind of given that little intro to what we're going to be learning today. Game of Thorns. Oh yes, I call it Game of Buds, but that didn't really work. Game of Thorns. I love it. That's awesome. And we will be learning more about thorns in the class. Would the bud growth structure differ greatly within the same species? Typically not. Of course, there is always variation between individuals, but overall, there is not a dramatic amount of difference within a species. And additionally, there's not a lot of differences between the life of the tree. So if I were to get buds from a tree that's relatively young, or a tree that's more mature, overall they're going to look very similar. So they aren't going to change, and we can use it at any point in the tree's life. And it'll be way more consistent for us. So if the buds are out of reach, then yeah, we would be looking at the bark or some other characteristics that are on the ground. And again, I have a class for that I will be able to direct you to in the middle of the presentation. Yes, there can be big differences within families, especially so. Yeah, we could identify different oaks by their buds. We could identify different hickories by their buds. Again, just need to know what they look for. And what we would be using are keys. So here's an overview of all the details that we are going to be learning today. I know that there's a lot on this page right here, but we're going to break it down. We're going to go through them one by one. And we're not going to just, walk through them in a list, but I'm going to show them to you in the order of most importance. And the way that I deem which ones are more important than others are how they appear on a dichotomous key. Now, let me know in the chat if you have ever used a dichotomous key before, or if you know what a dichotomous key is, okay? Here is a very simplified version of one, right? So this is a dichotomous key for animals. And what this really is, it's a series of questions with each question having a yes or no answer, true or false, right? So let's say that we have found some vertebrate animal, right? We want to know what it is. Question number one is, does it have fur? Okay? If the answer is yes, great, then we have a mammal. And then maybe there's a key for the mammals and we keep going. If the answer is no, well then the next question is, does it have feathers? Yes, then it's a bird. No, then we keep going, and so on and so forth, right? The same thing works for trees, for herbaceous plants, for mushrooms, right? Except the questions are going to be different. So it's not going to be, does it have fur? It would be something like, what is the arrangement? Instead of, does it have feathers? It'd be something like, how many bud scales does it have? So what I'm going to be teaching you next is the set of details that we're going to be encountering most often when we find a key for winter characteristics, a key for buds. Now let's actually switch to the bud cam, and I can show you a couple of those. So here's one. This is the Winter Tree Finder. This is a great book. I highly recommend it. And I think it's relevant to basically all of Eastern North America. But the one that I really love is this right here. This is the Peterson Field Guide to Eastern Trees. And I really like this book because it has a lot of great resources for identifying trees in the wintertime. If we look at the appendix right here, key to leafless trees. All right, so in here is a set of all those questions that we were just talking about. So we can talk more about keys and what resources that I recommend later on in the class. But basically you want to be looking for a field guide that is most relevant to your area, right? This is Peterson Field Guide to Eastern Trees. Oh, it's funny, the green is taking that out. So it's kind of missing there. But it's the Peterson Field Guide to Eastern Trees. And I would not be getting the Peterson Field Guide to Western Trees because I'm in Alabama. If you're in California or Oregon, you would want to be looking for a different field guide than this one right here. Let me know if that makes sense. And like the video if you are learning something so far. But with that, let's get into the first detail that we need to know for distinguishing buds in the wintertime, and that is arrangement. And by the way, this lines up with the first detail that we're using with leaves, right? That's one of the most important details to look for even if you have a tree with leaves. And the reason why this works so well is because the arrangement of the leaves is going to follow the arrangement of the buds, which is going to correlate with the arrangement of the leaf scars, which is going to correlate with the arrangement of the branches as well. So there are many different ways to get an idea of the arrangement. And someone asked before, what if you have something where you can't reach the buds? You could still get an idea of the arrangement. You just have to look up and see whether or not the branches are coming off opposite at the same point or alternating. So alternate on the left and opposite are the ones that you're going to encounter most often, but there is another one called whorl, and whorl is where you have 3 or more leaves coming off at the same point. This is a bud of southern catalpa, a very beautiful tree. It's one of the only ones that I could think of that has this characteristic. But we're going to focus on the other two for this presentation, alternate and opposite. Okay, so some examples of buds that have an alternate arrangement, or trees with an alternate arrangement, would be oak, any member of oak, the genus Quercus, tulip poplar, that's Liriodendron tulipifera, black willow, which is Salix nigra. You can see clearly that they all have one bud per leaf node. There are never two that are occurring at the same spot. Let's look at the bud cam really quick for another look at that. All right, So here are some of those that we were seeing before. Here's a good example, right? So see how we have one bud here, then a bud here, then a bud here? That's alternating. Similarly, these ones are tinier, but there's one here, and one here. And though the lateral buds, the ones on the side, are more tiny, the leaf scars also are alternating, right? So we could use that as well to get an idea of the arrangement. All right. The next main type of arrangement that we're going to encounter is an opposite arrangement. Okay, so tell me if you've ever heard it. You may have heard it from me before because I preach it all the time. The acronym for the situation that you have found yourself in if you have found a tree with an opposite arrangement. There's a couple of different ones, and I'm curious to hear the one that you may have heard before. So I'm going to look in the chat to see if anyone has an idea of that while I take a sip of water. Here, the ones that we're looking at are flowering dogwood, white ash, and elderberry. Mad horse, yes, that's a common one. Mad dog horse, yep. So the one that I usually go by is called you've got it made. If you find a tree with opposite branching, you've got it made. And the reason why you've got it made is because there aren't that many that you have to go through, right? Made for maple, ash, dogwood, and elder. And as you can see by this slide right here, 3 of those are represented. We have flowering dogwood, a very common one, at least in the south, white ash, and elderberry. Okay, let's look at some of those on the bud cam. So I like to use this one right here. This is the dogwood because it's a good representation showing that it's not just where the actual buds are, but we can see that the branching of the twigs is clearly opposite as well. They're coming off at the same point. As well here, you can see 2 buds right there, 2 buds right there at the top. And then this one, 2 buds on the side, 2 on the side, and then 2 kind of accessory buds there, and then that 1 terminal bud at the top. You will notice, like with the ash right here, that there is 1 single one at the top, and that is the terminal bud. We'll be talking about that in just a second, so keep that in mind. If you ever see 3 at the top like that, but there are 2 coming off at that point, it is still an oppositely branched tree. Actually, perfect. It is the next one here right now. So now we're going to be talking about terminal buds. Okay, so let's take a look at several different kinds of terminal buds that we have. I really want to stress the importance of this detail right here. When we're talking about trees with leaves, there are the 2 first things that we always want to look for, right? It's the leaf type, whether they are simple or compound, and then it's the arrangement, which we looked at before. For winter buds, it's very similar. The first one that we look for is the arrangement. The second one that we look for is whether or not it has a true or a false terminal bud. Another way that this is often stated is whether or not there is a terminal bud present, and I'll walk through that. So on the left-hand side, those are examples of having a true terminal bud where a terminal bud is present. And what I'm highlighting in the slide is that the terminal bud is significantly larger than the buds that are on the side. If you ever encounter that, chances are that you are dealing with a true terminal bud, as opposed to the ones on the right side that have a false terminal bud, right? We can see that the bud that's at the end and the buds that are on the sides are almost exactly, in fact, they are exactly the same size. That would clue you that you're probably dealing with a tree that has false terminal buds. And then on the very right side, and we see it actually with both of the specimens, there is a bit of kind of a projection of the twig going forward past the bud, and that usually means that you're dealing with a false terminal bud as well. Sometimes they have a more zigzag pattern. We'll look at those in a second on the table. But it's a very important characteristic, and I want to make sure that you understand it. Sometimes it can take a little bit of time to get a hang for this, but if you go by these two characteristics, that they're exceedingly larger than the ones on the side at the end, and whether or not there is zigzagging or whether or not they are the same size, that is going to help you out a lot. So let's look at a couple of other examples of having terminal buds present. We have black cherry. This one doesn't have quite as large of a terminal bud in relation to the lateral buds, but it is still there. And we'll also see that if we're following the twig, it almost goes straight into the terminal bud. That's usually the case. The other one, here we have pawpaw, and this one is a really, really cool bud. It's one of my favorites. It has, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The bud scale type is very interesting, right? We can see there at the end that it has way larger of a terminal bud than the ones on the side. And then we have the sugar maple, which is right above me, and we have those two kind of accessory buds on the side there, because this is an oppositely branched tree, a maple, right? And then that single larger bud at the end, and that is the terminal bud. Okay, and then we have where the terminal bud is absent. So a false terminal bud, you might see it called, where it's not present. So persimmon is a great example of that. We can see the persimmon on the left side, that twig is really extending past the bud right there. Similarly, we see this sugarberry. It's closely related to hackberry. You may have heard of that name for the tree. And another one is that you see how distinctive the zigzagging pattern is on this one, right? That's very characteristic of trees with a false terminal bud. And then the sycamore here on the right, we're seeing a bit of that twig projection go past it. And in addition, the size of the buds are, basically exactly the same size. We see that with all of these here. Okay, so let's look at a couple of these on the bud cam. I want to show you the false terminal buds first. All right, so here we have sycamore, right? First thing, all those buds, these are the lateral buds, the ones on the side, and the terminal bud there at the end, they're all relatively the same size, okay? Then we have this persimmon right here, and I'll use this to show you a little bit more closely, right? We can see that bit of the twig extending past the bud right there. Very important. Okay, and then another thing I wanted to show you, if we look at how the twig is going at the end, this is mulberry, we see that the bud is going off, the end bud is going off at an angle. That's another case in which that's cluing you in that it is a false terminal bud. All right, as opposed to these over here, so there's the pawpaw, right? There's the end bud, the terminal bud, and the lateral buds on the side are way smaller. You almost can't even see them, they're so small. But you can definitely see that fuzzy terminal bud right there. And then one more, here's a hickory bud. And again, like morphologically, like the shape, the color is all different on the terminal bud than these smaller lateral buds on the side. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the presentation, and I just want to check in with everyone, and I want to make sure that you got a good grasp of that concept. When you are encountering different species, it might take some time and might take some figuring out of which one it is, but I'll show you, even if you're going through a key, what you can do if that comes up. You can always, try out one way and then go back and try out the other as well. Yes, I see someone saying that the false ones come off at an angle. That is definitely true. Very often they do that. So, here's another great one. In the spring, what happens to the buds? Do they become leaves? Do they become new stem growth? Or what is it? And the answer is it can be both. So if you follow a leaf down, it will go to one bud. But one bud doesn't necessarily turn into one leaf. I encourage you after the class to look up videos or time lapses of buds opening up in the spring. It's really cool. Especially in the terminal bud, usually there is kind of an extension of the growth that's going to be happening there. So there could be a stem and a whole set of leaves that come out from a terminal bud. And that is also usually why they are larger. There's more material that's encapsulated that they're holding for the following season. Okay, so I think we have a good handle of that. If you have any questions, then we can revisit this at the end of the presentation. But we'll move on to the next one. This is very important when you are dealing with keys. It's going to come up often because it's relatively distinctive. Spines, prickles, and thorns, okay? Spines, prickles, and thorns. Now, I think that, at least in America, we would probably generally call all these things thorns, right? What's the phrase? Every rose has its thorn. Although botanically speaking, it's technically not true. What we see on the rose, that's the one in the middle, is technically what's called a prickle. You can see that it's kind of detached in some way from the rest of the stem material there. The one on the far left is from Chickasaw plum. That is a thorn. You see that they're coming off in groups of 1 at the leaf node. And on the far right from this black locust, those are spines. They're coming off in groups of 2. Okay? The spines are like the one thing that doesn't necessarily follow our rule. Even though these spines are opposite, black locust has an alternate arrangement. But if you saw the tree, it would be very clear. Okay? So the reason why we are learning about these things at this stage in time is because, again, if you're going through a key, it's going to be very early on that I ask you, does this tree have thorns on it or not? And the reason is because if it does, then that eliminates a whole bunch of other things, right? If you are trying to identify plums, wild plums, for example, and it has thorns, then at least in my area, you are now basically limited to Chickasaw plum and wild American plum, so Prunus angustifolia and Prunus americana. If they don't have thorns, then there's a whole other set of them they have to deal with. And same thing, if it had thorns and it were a bean from the bean family, then we'd be looking at things like black locust or honey locust. So it really helps us out when we are going through our keys. Okay, so with that, I think that brings us to resources to learn more effectively, right? Because I've been talking about how important it is to go through these keys and use the details that we found, right, to go through and figure out what kind of species that you have. Because you can use that to take some bud that you have no idea what the species is and actually figure it out, right? So here are some resources that I wish existed when I was learning this myself. These are all on my Patreon, right? So these are photos from a video walkthrough that I just put up where I am actually going through the keys myself, okay? So if there are instances of characteristics that you're encountering on the keys that are very common, that are a little bit unfamiliar, we actually walk through those and I show you my process for going through and keying out different species, okay? But I have way more other things than just that. So I have a set of these winter tree profiles. I imagine that a lot of people that are joining today are foragers or naturalists like myself, that you probably found me through Feral Foraging, right? So I wanted to give a lot of resources for people who are interested in learning to build relationships with trees through use. So this was what we showed at the beginning. This is a sassafras sheet, and then we also have some for pawpaw and a bunch of others. Here's the one for persimmon, and then here's ones for medicinal trees. So I have a set for medicinal trees, those are up right now, and then I have a set for wild fruit trees as well, because I want you to be able to scout for them for fruit trees so you can find them in the wintertime for the next season, or if you're interested in scouting for medicinal trees so that you could use them in the wintertime, which is when people often need them the most. So those are all both available on my Patreon, and then in the description you can find a link to it, and there is also a link to, I think I have one freebie for each of them. Again, the ones for medicinal trees are up right now, and then the ones for the fruit trees are going to be up tomorrow. So be sure to look out for that on Feral Foraging. And then the very last thing that we have, in addition to a more in-depth look at the buds, we also have resources for learning about how to identify and characterize trees by their bark. This one's more difficult, like I said, but it is helpful and you do encounter it on keys. So I wanted to give you things that you could use to characterize them better. So if you are interested in any of that, wow, that was a cool transition, you can scan the QR code that's right there on my left, or if you are on mobile, my Patreon link is in the description, and you can check that out. And all of those things that I just showed you, you can get access to today for free with a 7-day trial. So I really am excited about all of these resources that I've made for winter tree characteristics, and I think that they're going to be really helpful to a lot of people, and I think that they would be really helpful to you as well. So if you're interested in supporting me and getting access to these exclusive classes for winter tree ID and a bunch of other stuff, because I've done this for summer tree ID as well, then check out the Patreon right there. I think that you'll have a great time, and I hope to see you there. Okay, so with that, let's continue on and learn more details that we're going to encounter when we're going through our keys. Go back to the presentation right here, and now we are talking about bud scales. Okay, so this was the one that I started to get into when we were looking at the pawpaw, and now we are going to look at it more closely. So there are some fancy terms that you will encounter when it comes to bud scales, but it doesn't really need to be that way. We can simplify it a lot. So we have least amount on the left all the way to most amount right here on the right. Okay, so if a bud doesn't have any scales that's protecting the immature leaf or the immature growth on the inside, that is called a naked bud. It has 0 bud scales and it's naked. Often, you will find these buds to be very hairy, as we were seeing with the pawpaw. And then we have 1-scaled buds, right? And so the easiest way to tell if it has 1 scale would be if it looks relatively uniform on the outside. If there aren't any kind of divots or ridges or anything on the bud, then it probably is single-scaled, especially if it's smooth and not hairy. All right, then we have what's called a valvate bud, which is a fancy term for a bud that has 2 scales on it. The biggest representation of this would be tulip poplar. So if I were to kind of like pop the middle part, you can see there's that ridge that runs along the center. Then it would break open into 2 pieces. That's called a valvate bud. Excuse me. So then here on the right side, we have the 3 or more bud scales, and that is called imbricate. But often you'll just see it called like many bud scales or 3 or more. So this one is from a horse chestnut, and we can see that there are certainly a lot of scales in this one. Just counting quickly, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 7 bud scales, right? Definitely way more than 3, and we can clearly see them as well. All right, so here are more examples of naked buds, right? We have the Carolina buckthorn and then the pawpaw as well. And with both of those, you see that they are distinctly hairy on the outside, right? That is a good giveaway that you are dealing with a tree that has naked buds, that doesn't have any bud scales. All right, and then we have these two, which are both a single scaled, right, black willow. Willow is probably, to me, the most well-known tree that has single bud scales. No matter what species of willow that you find, if it's a white willow in Europe or a weeping willow that's ornamentally planted or the native wild black willows that you encounter, they're all going to have a single bud scale. So that bud is going to be relatively uniform. And then sycamore is another one. All right, so these ones all have many bud scales, right? We have the silver maple. Maples have a lot of bud scales on them typically. Hop hornbeam in the middle, and then sweet gum, right? That clearly have a bunch. And here's another cool thing that I want you to look for, right? Remember, maples have an opposite arrangement, and then the hop hornbeam and the sweet gum both have an alternating arrangement. And we can also kind of see that on the maple, the bud scales are also distinctly, like we have 2 here, and then 2 here, and 2 here, and so on, right? But with the hop hornbeam and the sweet gum, they are kind of moving up in an alternating arrangement as well. So in many ways, not perfectly, but in many ways, the arrangement of the bud scales is also following the arrangement of the tree. which I think is really cool. Okay, let's go and look at bud scales a little bit more closely now on the bud cam. So yeah, all right. Let's look at this one more closely again. This was our pawpaw. All right, so you can see there on the bud how hairy that it is, right? And it's very, like if I'm to the touch, it's very fuzzy as well. So that is our naked bud. And then here is the tulip poplar, right? We can see there's that ridge along the center part. So that's a good clue that this is two-scaled, also called valvate. Then here, this one is actually from serviceberry or Juneberry. And if we look at that one, we can see that there are a ton of bud scales on it, right? And another thing that we just noticed on this one is that the margins are hairy. So just like how we're looking at different characteristic of the margins of leaves, sometimes we also look at characteristic of the margin of the buds, like that these ones are hairy and that they're a little bit darker on the outside. And then I had it here somewhere. Yep. So here's our sycamore. Let's look at this one more closely, right? And so there aren't any, it's a little bit ridged, but they aren't very distinct overall. So that is cluing us in that this is a single bud scale on the outside. And again, the reason why we want to know these things is because you're going to encounter them on the key. It's going to ask you how many scales that the bud has. And when you hit that question, you need to be able to answer it correctly, because if, let's say it had 3 or more bud scales and you said it had 1, and you would be going down a path that would not lead you to the identity of the species that you have. Because all these details, you know, at least if it's between having many bud scales or only having 1, it's not going to vary within individuals, right? So if you went down the wrong path, you're not going to end up somehow magically at the right one. You need to back up and then go down the right one if you were doing that for keys. In the Patreon video that I was telling you about in the walkthrough, I show you my method for walking through keys and keeping track of what I was doing. Okay, so then we have, this one is my favorite. Have I said that already? I probably have said that a detail is my favorite, but this one is really my favorite. Leaf scars and bundle scars. We're getting into a set of details now where you really are going to want something like a loop, and I believe in the description there should be a link to tools that I recommend if you happen to be interested. This loop is one of them. It has 3 different ones, so you can go, 4 different levels of magnification. Anyway, let me show you what is going on with the bundle scars, and then you also notice that I made note of the compound versus simple right here, because there's a trick that you can use if you're into identifying trees in other parts of the season. But first, let's talk more about these leaf scars and bundle scars. All right, I think actually I'm going to go to the bud cam to demonstrate this one so we can really look at it more closely. Here we go. Perfect. Okay, so this is an ash bud that I'm holding right now, right? And you see that there are the buds, right? They're pointing off. And underneath the buds are these lighter colored kind of half moon portions, right? See them up there as well? Okay, so let me zoom in on these a little bit more. So the overall area, the entire area of that lighter color, that is called the leaf scar. So that is a scar that was left behind from when a leaf from last season fell off. And then you see that there are kind of like these dots that are on the inside. They're almost going in a ring right there. Those dots are called bundle scars. Okay, so let's switch back to the presentation view. So here is a much closer view that'll help us get a good picture of what I'm talking about here. Okay, so the tiny dots in the inside are the bundle scars. Those are where there were, what you could think of as leaf veins going into the twig that broke off, right? The overall area is the leaf scar. So where we had the petiole of the leaf break off makes the leaf scar. The veins of that make those holes that we see, which are the bundle scars. The number of bundle scars that are in that leaf scar is an important characteristic for identifying the tree. So we see this one on the left, that is sweet gum. I think sweet gum is one of the best examples to use for looking at bundle scars and leaf scars because they always have three. There are always three bundle scars for sweet gum, and they're very easy to spot. They're large and very distinctive. Okay? Here we have a horrible tree right above me, at least horrible in North America, tree of heaven. This is a really noxious, invasive tree. And what we see is that there are, I mean, if we counted them, you know, there are, who knows, 16 or 20 different bundle scars right here. But sometimes if you're looking at a key or if you're looking at a description, they would say that the bundle scars are grouped. So comes in groups of. And in this case, it would be something like 7 or 8, groups of 8 for this tree of heaven. Let me see, do I have? Yes, I do. Okay, let's look at sweet gum under the bud cam as well. See, okay, there we go. All right, we're gonna magnify this one, and all right, do you guys see that right there? So we've got the 1, 2, 3. This part overall is the leaf scar, but those 3 dots right there in the middle, those are the bundle scars. And if I go to another part, you see that there's 3, another part over here, there's 3, and so on and so on. Any part that I looked at the leaf scar for the sweet gum, we would be seeing that there are 3 bundle scars. Yeah, and here's another trick that I want you to try. When we get into the springtime and the summertime, find a sweet gum or find another tree maybe that you gathered this year in the wintertime and you counted the number of bundle scars that it has, and then slowly break off one of the leaves and see if you can actually notice and observe in real time the leaf scar and the bundle scars being made from you interacting with it. It's a really, really cool thing. I've done this with sweet gum before, and I don't know, it's just a cool thing to see. It's kind of like going through a real-life time lapse in nature of how things arrive the way that they are, but you're witnessing them before you. I'm gonna have a sip of water here really quick while I check the chat to see if there are any questions that have come up from any of that so far. All right, so this one is not an essential detail, but I do want to give it to you because if there are, I noticed that there was a lot of people in the chat who were studying dendrology, who were already into botany, into different plants, and they wanted to kind of expand their knowledge into winter trees. So as I talked about before, if you're familiar with leaf type, whether it's compound or simple, obviously in the wintertime, we don't have access to the leaves, at least not immediate access to the leaves. Sometimes they'll be on the ground, but that's for another time. So how could we get an idea of what they are, right? If you knew that something was simple or compound, you might get a better guess because you're just familiar with those in the wintertime. So if the leaf scars are very large, there's a good chance that that might have come from a tree with compound leaves. If the leaf scars are very small, then there's a good chance that it might have come from a leaf with simple leaves. All right, so here's 3 examples. Sassafras, red maple, and black cherry. All of them have simple leaves, and the leaf scar is small, and also like in relation to the bud, the leaf scar is very small, right? And if you think about like a compound leaf has to have a larger petiole to support way more like actual weight of leaflets on them than a smaller simple leaf would, that makes sense. So here are leaf scars from trees with compound leaves. Mockernut hickory, Carya tomentosa. I saw people talking about the term tomentose in the chat. So of course it's called tomentosa because of all the hairs that are on the twigs and the buds. You can see them a little bit towards the apex right there of the twig. Tree of heaven and green ash. All of these are going to have larger leaf scars on them. It's not 100%, I'm sure that you could find scenarios where this doesn't line up exactly, but it is a really good thing to go by. So with that in mind, I'd like to switch to the bud cam, and let's see if we can find some of those examples. All right, so here is a hickory, right? Relatively large leaf scar right there. At least if we were to compare that to something like, here is our Juneberry again, and can you even see the leaf scar right there? Maybe a little bit It's like a thin line right beneath the bud. You can barely see it at all. But there are examples that break those. So this is the leaf scar of tulip poplar. I don't even need, you can see those easily, right? Tulip poplar, of course, has simple leaves, but the leaf scars are relatively large. But then again, we have the ash, which has compound leaves, and these leaf scars again are larger also. So, you know, if I had to predict, maybe 85% of the time, that rule is going to work for you. So if you have absolutely no idea, then it might be able to help you out if you happen to know it. All right, so then we're going to talk about the pith. This is another really cool detail that you just don't ever encounter, you don't ever think about, you don't ever worry about until you are dealing with winter trees. And that's one reason why I love it so much. Okay, so here are 5 different kinds of pith. These are the ones that you are most likely to encounter. And let me see. So yes, we'll start with the ones on the very left. Now when I say pith, what I'm talking about is the inner portion of the twig. And twig is a term that's kind of flippantly used in English. If I got like a small, branch or something, like, oh, look at this thing, it's a twig, right? But twig, for winter tree ID, we need to be a little bit more technical. When we say twig, we mean the growth from this past season only, right? So if we're looking at the trunk of the tree, well, that's been around for every season of the tree. Branches have been around for fewer, but still many. And then a branchlet has been around for 2 to 3. Okay, so a twig is just the last year, a branchlet is 2 to 3 years, and then a branch would be 3 or more. All right, so all of these ones here that I've shown you, these are all twigs, right? Everyone that we've looked at are twigs. And the reason is because, well, of course, like if you were to chainsaw a tree across and look inside, you wouldn't be looking at the pith. You need to go and find the twigs from first year's growth to get a better idea of what the pith is going to be like. All right, so the different kinds are, on the left, solid, continuous. Those are 2 names that you'll see for them. And that is a pith. If you were to, press your nail into them, it's going to be relatively uniform and woody overall, right? From the outside to the inside, it's all going to be woody. It's going to feel relatively the same. Then we have a spongy or a porous pith, okay? So this one will typically be much different in color from the rest of the material around it. It will feel different, right? It'll feel almost like, kind of like styrofoam in a way. You should be able to press into it a lot more than you could press into the solid continuous pith. Okay, the one in the middle is a diaphragmed pith. So diaphragmed pith and chambered pith are kind of cousins, all right? They both have divisions in them, but here's the difference. A diaphragmed pith has divisions with spongy material in between. A chambered pith has divisions with hollow space between. And on the far right, this one's honeysuckle. Again, great resource to be able to identify honeysuckle in the wintertime to eradicate it, one of the worst invasive weeds that we have in North America. All right, so if we think of spongy, we go spongy, diaphragmed, chambered, hollow. All right, I want to show you these ones on the bud cam for sure. And I'll save my favorite one for last. Okay, let's find where's a hickory? Oh, I lost my hickory. I'm crazy, I just had it. Well, I must have thrown the hickory somewhere. Okay, so let's instead look at, here is our Juneberry. This one has a continuous pith. All right, so if I'm pressing into it, there is no, it feels all relatively the same. Versus, let me find a better ash to show you this. There we go. All right, there is an ash. Ash, most ash, I think all of them, have spongy pith, right? See, it's a very different color from the one in between. And if I press into it, you can see I can even leave indentations in there. It's much easier to press into. All right, I'm gonna try to show you tulip poplar but it might be a little bit difficult. So yeah, I made this long cut here to try to show it to you. It's just kind of hard to see, but maybe you can see that there are light colored divisions that are filled with spongy material on the inside. So this is a diaphragm pith. I think that tulip poplar is the only tree that I can think of that has that characteristic. And then the last one, my absolute favorite. See those right there? So this is from black walnut. Black walnut has a chambered pith. So if you were ever uncertain between if a tree was black walnut or pecan, I think a lot of people sometimes run into that scenario. Relatively simple. The black walnut has a chambered pith and the pecan has a solid continuous pith with a different color. So if you ever run into that, you are never going to be unsure between those two. You'll always know which is which between black walnut and pecan. Lots of terminology to absorb. Yes, it is a lot, but don't worry because I have an article on my website called The Ultimate Guide to Winter Tree ID, which goes through all of these, right? It goes through all of them, and then on my Patreon I have a ton of walkthrough videos that you can use to make sure that this all sinks in. Oh, great question. Someone asked about what about white walnut butternut? A tree that I wish that there was more of. I'm on the hunt for a more mature white walnut in my area. They also have chambered pith. Okay? One time I encountered one in the summer and I wasn't sure, like, man, it looked a lot like black walnut, but there was some things that weren't right about it. So, okay, maybe it wasn't a walnut at all. And I checked the pith and it was chambered. I was like, oh my gosh, I think that I just found, it's my first white walnut. Way down in North Alabama. I wasn't expecting to find them there. So these characteristics help you in a lot of other scenarios than just in the wintertime. They really are worth learning. Okay, stipule scars. So this one is actually a sneak peek from, we have the more advanced in-depth version of this presentation that's going to be on my Patreon. Stipule scars is one of the ones that's represented on there, but I wanted to show it to you here today in the intro class because this is another one that does show up a lot when you're going through keys. In the walkthrough that I did, I think we encountered the stipule scars question like 3 or 4 times at least. Okay, so here is what we are looking for. So with stipule scars, if you know, a stipule is kind of like a leafy, for lack of a better term right now, it's a leafy appendage that's growing near the leaf node, right? Separate from the leaves, it's growing near the leaf node. Similar to leaves and how they leave behind leaf scars, these also leave behind leaf scars. All right, so they vary in form. The ones that you'll see most often on a key are when it's going to be asking you if it has a stipule scar that is encircling the twig, that's going all the way around. So we can see on the left and the right, the tulip poplar on the left clearly has a ring that's going around the twig. Similarly, the sycamore also has a ring from the stipule scar that's going all the way around. Those aren't the only kinds of stipule scars, though. In the middle, we have a really cool tree called bladdernut that has stipule scars, but they're much more tiny and inconspicuous, so you might not notice them at first. And on keys, they aren't usually asking about these, but I wanted you to know about them because they might come up, but the ones with the ringed ones will definitely come up. So let me show you those now. All right, again, well, I got them both right in front of me, tulip poplar and sycamore. So see these rings that are going around the twig? Those are the stipule scars. Let's look at them a little bit more closely. There they are right there. Very easy to see on the tulip poplar, at least, light colored, going all the way around the twig. And then here they are on the sycamore. Not quite as easy to see with the naked eye, but they are definitely there, going all the way around. See those? Those are our stipule scars. And that might come up as like scar encircling twig or stipule scar encircling the twig if you were to see them on a key for winter trees. Okay. All right, everyone. that is all the details that I wanted to show you today. So like I said, if you are now interested in learning more about winter trees, identifying trees in the wintertime for whatever reason, wanting to scout them for fruit, wanting to learn them for tree associations like winter trees like enoki or lion's mane, or maybe future trees like chanterelles, then I have a ton of resources for you to continue on the learning on the Patreon. I want to try to have a monthly Q&A. We usually do those on the Patreon. I want to try to have one more before the end of the year, but we are getting a little bit into the holiday season, so hopefully we'll be able to make that happen. But we've got a fantastic set of resources there for you. All of these, oh my gosh, there's so many. All of these are all available on there that you can download with a PDF and use at your leisure. The ones for medicinal trees are up right now, and I'm getting the ones up for wild fruit trees as well, and I'm going to continue to add to them. I think I have 5 for each, but I have no thought of stopping that. I want to keep on adding more and more so that people like you will have the resources that you need to continue to learn this really important and helpful skill. And with that, thank you all so much for joining. If you have any questions, then I will be looking at the chat and be hanging around with you all for a second to answer any questions that might have come up from the class. I hope to see you on the Patreon. Thank you so much for being here. And smash the like button. Yes, thank you, Matrix. I wasn't doing the YouTube thing. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Yes. Okay, so someone asked a question about green ash versus white ash. And so yeah, you can use the leaf scars because the leaf scar of white ash is surrounding them, but the leaf scar of green ash, it's going to be below the bud. And that's the main way that I would use also. I don't think that there's a major difference in the actual bundle scars. Do simple leaves tend to have fewer bundle scars? Gone for good asks. That's a good question. And I will tell you my guess is yes. My guess is definitely yes, because of course, if we have a simple leaf with a small leaf scar, there's just less space for as many bundle scars. Hickory and tree of heaven can have tons of bundle scars. So I would guess also that, yes, that is the case. That's typically going to be that way. But we have anomalies. Tulip poplar has a ton of bundle scars on them and a large leaf scar, so it works most of the time. Would the location that you are at help with identifying the species? Yes, definitely so. So, in this book right here, if I hold it right here, then you still get it. Oh wait, no, it just goes straight through. That's so funny. There are a lot of species in here that you are not going to see in a book for Western trees, and vice versa. There's a lot of species in here that you wouldn't see in a book for Europe, and etc. So when you're looking for something to learn winter trees, then you want to be looking for a field guide that is more specific to your area. That's going to be more helpful. Although the keys get really long. I mean, you could have keys that are, over 200 questions long if you were dealing with something that was like North America or all of Western Europe or something like that. So less is more when it comes to field guides. Caria cordiformis kind of has a false naked bud thing going on. Yes, it does. There's a bit of, I don't want to say like debate necessarily, but for Caria cordiformis, which is bitternut hickory, I've seen places saying that they do have naked buds, and I've seen places saying that no, they're actually like valvate. There's actually 2 bud scales that look like they're naked buds. The book that I reference that is to me like a big source of truth if I don't know something with winter tree characteristics tells me that they have naked buds. So I usually go with that one. But yeah, it's kind of funny that there are different places that say different things for that one. Gone for Good asked, do you know any good books for identifying invasive ornamental species in North America? I don't actually, and that's a good question. I would love to see one. I might actually make some resources for that myself because I think that there should be more of them. I know that there are accounts and stuff that you can follow that share that information. I don't know of a specific one, like a specific book that has that. Oh, not an off-topic question asking about the Audubon Guide to Trees be a good choice for tree guides. I think I have it right here. Cool. I think in other in other presentations I've like knocked down all my bookshelf when I'm gathering books for the class. This is the Audubon Field Guide to Trees. It's not my favorite, and not because it's a bad book or anything, I just don't like the way it's laid out. But I will say, if you're interested in winter tree identification, at least the one for the eastern region has very few resources and not much information. So if you want to learn about winter tree characteristics and you're choosing between the two, Peterson is the way that I would go. They have great winter characteristics in their book. Yeah, congrats to Oliver for finding their first oyster mushroom. Do these characteristics apply? Yes. Largely the characteristics that I showed you in the intro class today only apply to deciduous trees. If I do a class on conifers, which I probably will, then that will be uploaded to the Patreon for you to get to enjoy. All right, everyone, I'll hang out here for a little bit longer. If there are any last-minute questions that you have, then you are free to ask them. Otherwise, I will probably be looking to the Patreon for any follow-up if people had questions there. If you join, you also get direct access to a group with me on our Discord server if you have any questions that come up. We also have, like I said, a monthly Q&A. So as you're learning through winter trees, we have the whole winter to learn all kinds of stuff together. Then you get to ask those and we all get to learn a whole bunch. Am I going to do any live classes in Toronto? Well, I have family in Toronto, so who knows? Maybe. I don't have any intentions of doing live classes in Toronto anytime soon, but you never know, right? Most of my classes will probably be in the North Alabama area for like live in-person classes. Someone's asking about the Discord. If you go to like my YouTube page or any of my social media places, that I'll have mobile links, and if you click that, there should be an invite that you can use to join my Discord server. That would be the place to go. Oh yeah, it's in the description also. I should have, of course, I should have thought about that. All right, everyone. 2 more minutes and then we will close this one out. But yeah, I'm just thinking through, it's funny, when I learned winter trees was actually when I learned trees. I didn't understand trees that well before I learned them, and it just so happened to be in the winter time. And I use this skill so much because as a forager, the winter is the perfect time to be scouting for new locations to go gather things, right? During the season, during the spring and the summer and the fall, there's always a season for something, right? There's black locust, and then there's plums, and then there's elderflower, and then there's elderberry, and then there's sumac, and then persimmon. I kind of fell out of order there a little bit. But there's always something that I need to be getting in a short time window. In the winter time, I get to take a break from worrying about all that stuff. And I just get to go out and explore and learn different trees, different ecotypes, ecosystems, and ecologies, and it's one of my favorite things. And I wouldn't be able to do it if it weren't for winter tree identification. Yes. Somebody asked, can twigs have a noticeable scent in winter on some species? Absolutely. So in fact, if we look at those sheets that I have, I'll take out 2. This one, pawpaw, and where are you? Oh yeah, this one too, persimmon and sassafras. Are there any others? Yeah, that's probably the main ones. So sassafras, right? Very distinctive sweet aroma that is released. Very pleasant one too. Black cherry, very distinct bitter almond aroma that is released. And then pawpaw, this one's cool. it's got like this like green bell pepper aroma that is released when you scratch the twigs and the leaves. All of those details are on, except maybe the pawpaw, but those details about the aroma are on these sheets as well. I put them in the remarks section because they are an important characteristic, I would say, in distinguishing the plant. If you weren't sure between something like prunus angustifolium, like a plum and cherry, scratching the twigs will give you a better guess as to which one that it is. Because cherries are going to tend to have that bitter almond aroma, and plums are going to tend to not have that aroma. Okay, I saw a few more come in. Maybe the immature pine cones is what you're asking about. I don't know if I've encountered that for white pine, but I have for things like loblolly, which are very common around me. Okay, I'm not familiar with Taxodium. I'm not familiar with that genus, but then asking about, does identifying certain trees help to identify other things? Yes, it does. I understand the vague question, don't worry. So, how do I phrase this? There are direct ways that identifying trees helps us. You're asking about mushrooms. I find lion's mane almost always growing on silver maple and hackberry. All the time. I find almost all my chicken of the woods growing on red oaks. I find most of my chanterelles growing around red oaks, right? So just that direct relationship is helping me to find other different species. But as well, you know, there's a concept of plant communities. So there are certain plants that are going to be growing, there are certain trees that are going to be growing in certain ecosystems and certain plants that are going to be growing alongside with them, right? So learning the trees is kind of like learning some of the keystone species that are part of that ecoregion, that are part of that ecosystem that you are encountering with. It's one piece of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle, but it's one piece of it, and it's a very helpful one, I would say. I know, imagine if we learned all these amazing things as a child. I started learning this stuff as an adult myself. I didn't learn any of this when I was a kid growing up. I just caught the bug, and it's what I've been doing ever since then. I can't stop. Okay, everyone, that is it for me for this one. I will see you all again. I have a bunch of other classes that I'm looking forward to. Probably the next class that you'll see me for, I think I have common fruit trees that's going to be on the Patreon, but I'll probably do something like an introduction to flower botany. It's an introduction to botany, which is really about plant families, which is really about flowers. So you'll probably see something like that in the springtime. In the summer, we do a summer tree ID version of this one. You're all on the mailing list, so you'll be notified about that, and there will always be more in-depth resources that are available to those most interested in the Patreon. So I encourage you to check that out. Thank you all so much, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you all.